Wyatt Turner had never seen so many people in one place, not even during the county fair back in Elk City. Denver was noisy, fast, and full of faces that didn't look twice at a boy wearing a sun-faded ball cap and scuffed-up boots. At 16, he'd already buried more than most men twice his age. His father, Sergeant Michael Turner, had died overseas 6 months back. The move to the city wasn't a choice. It was survival. His mother, Mary, did what she could to keep them afloat, holding down 2 jobs and pretending not to cry at night when she thought Wyatt was asleep. But Wyatt wasn't a kid anymore, and he wasn't asleep. He was wide awake, listening, watching, and trying hard not to let the anger swallow him whole. School was worse than he'd imagined. Back home, people said "Ma'am" and "Sir," without being ironic. Here, manners made you look soft, and the wrong accent painted a target on your back. Wyatt learned that on day 1, when he asked where the main office was, and got laughed at for the way he said "office." They called him Hillbilly, Hayseed, Farmer Boy. Some were subtle, others weren't. They mocked the way he dressed, the way he walked, even the lunch he brought, bologna sandwiches and thermos coffee. The worst of them was Chase Reynolds, the kind of boy who was born rich, stayed rich, and acted like that gave him the right to decide who mattered. Chase had a grip on the school like a choke chain. He ran the robotics club, wore varsity jackets even though he didn't play sports, and knew how to smile just enough in front of teachers to keep out of trouble. Wyatt kept his head down and his fists unclenched, just like his dad had taught him. "A real man doesn't rise to barking dogs," his father used to say. Still, the days wore him thin. He'd go through the motions in class, eat lunch alone behind the gym, and then drive straight to a rusted old garage out by a junkyard on the edge of town. The place belonged to a friend of his uncle's who let Wyatt use the space in exchange for sweeping up and helping around. In that garage sat a battered 1969 CAMARO, red paint faded to orange dust, with his father's initials etched under the glove box. That car was more than a memory. It was a mission. Wyatt spent every free minute under its hood trying to bring it back to life, not because he wanted to race or show off. He needed to fix something. Everything else in his life felt broken beyond repair. But this he could control. Mary worried about him, especially when he came home late with grease up to his elbows and eyes that looked far older than 16. She didn't say much, just made sure he ate and prayed over him while he pretended not to hear. She missed Oklahoma too, but she never let it show. Wyatt saw it in the way she kept a photo of his dad tucked into her wallet like a lifeline. She worked morning shifts at a diner and cleaned offices at night, and still found time to iron his clothes and leave scripture notes in his lunch bag. Wyatt didn't talk much anymore, but when he did, it was to tell her he was okay, even when he wasn't. At school, Chase kept the pressure steady. He didn't throw punches, but his words cut deep and spread like wildfire. Rumors, mocking memes, whispers in the halls. Chase made sure Wyatt stayed isolated. And yet, something about Wyatt's silence seemed to bother him. Maybe it was the way he didn't break, didn't beg, didn't respond. It wasn't defiance. Wyatt just didn't see the point. He wasn't there to win popularity. He was there to survive. And in the middle of all this noise, he kept working on the CAMARO. Not because he thought it would change anything, but because that was the only place he could remember who he was before the world got loud and cruel. His roots weren't something he was ashamed of. Red dirt and hard work ran in his blood, and in that garage he held onto them with both hands. One afternoon, as he wiped his hands on a rag and leaned over the hood, he found something tucked inside a crevice of the dashboard. A folded, yellowed letter. His heart skipped. He recognized the handwriting immediately. It was his dad's. The envelope was marked with a date just before his last deployment. Wyatt sat in the front seat, hands shaking as he opened it. Inside were words written not just for a son, but for a man his father knew he'd become. Son, I won't be there to see the road ahead of you, but know this. The road doesn't define the driver. You do. Keep your head high, your word strong, and your faith stronger. Whatever comes, remember, turners don't quit. That letter hit harder than any insult Chase could throw. It didn't fix everything, but it lit a fuse in Wyatt's chest. From that day on, his work in the garage became more than a project. It was a promise. He began researching old engine blueprints and hybrid conversions, sneaking into the library to study technical manuals and watching online tutorials after his homework was done. He didn't tell anyone what he was building. It wasn't just about fixing the car anymore. He was trying to build something new, something that could carry his name forward the way his father once did in uniform. Not with noise or ego, but with quiet strength and steel resolve. Wyatt wasn't out to prove anyone wrong. He was out to prove his father right. The CAMARO wasn't flashy, but it rumbled with pride. In the high school parking lot full of polished sedans and leased sports cars, Wyatt's dusty old machine stood out like a flag planted in enemy territory. Most students mocked it behind smirks and whispered comments, but every now and then a head would turn with curiosity. One of those heads belonged to Mr. McCall, the school's history teacher, a man with grey at the temples and a limp in his right leg. He had served in the Gulf War, something Wyatt didn't know until the day McCall stopped him in the hallway, eyes locked on the nameplate inside the CAMARO's dash, Michael Turner. Without a word, the man straightened his back and offered Wyatt a slow, deliberate salute. Wyatt didn't say anything, but his chest tightened with something he hadn't felt in weeks. Respect that didn't need words. That moment didn't go unnoticed. Word traveled fast. The Hillbilly had a father who was a war hero, and suddenly the jokes didn't land the same. Kids who used to laugh now looked the other way. The whispers quieted. Wyatt never brought it up. He didn't need to. His silence made the weight of it heavier. He kept doing his work, showing up on time, fixing the car and leaving the boasting to others. But the CAMARO now carried more than a project. It was a legacy on wheels. Wyatt felt it every time he turned a wrench, every time he wiped his father's initials clean of dust. Chase saw it too, and he didn't like it. His little kingdom, built on charm, manipulation, and being the smartest guy in the room, was cracking. He'd worked hard to keep Wyatt on the margins, but now the new narrative threatened his grip. People started asking questions, and worse, started paying attention to someone else. Chase didn't lash out publicly. That wasn't his style. He worked in shadows, pulling strings behind closed doors. When he found out Wyatt had been using the school's leftover supply order forms to request spare parts, he made sure those orders got lost. Suddenly, Wyatt found himself short on critical components, timing belts, sensors, basic electrical boards he needed for his hybrid engine design. No one gave him a reason. No one had to. He knew. Still, Wyatt didn't complain. He drove to scrap yards after school, hunted for parts on Craigslist, and started building with what he could find. If he couldn't get what he needed, he'd make do. His father had always said that the strongest men weren't the ones with the best tools. They were the ones who did the most with the least. The setbacks only made him dig deeper. That letter from his dad never left the CAMARO's glove box. Whenever doubt crept in, Wyatt unfolded it, read the words again, and remembered who he was doing this for. One evening, while checking under the passenger seat for a loose socket wrench, Wyatt noticed a second envelope wedged behind the carpet. This one was older, almost crumbling at the edges. Inside was a short letter from his father to Mary, written just before deployment. It was tender, honest, full of faith. Mary read it in silence at the kitchen table, holding the paper with both hands like it might vanish if she let go. She didn't speak when she handed it back, just nodded, lips trembling but steady. That night, Wyatt didn't just feel like he was chasing his father's footsteps. He felt like his father was walking beside him. Despite the roadblocks, the project started coming together. The hybrid engine wasn't perfect, but it was functional. An old-school V8 modified with a regenerative braking system Wyatt had designed himself, inspired by a documentary he watched late one night. He worked long hours, sometimes till midnight, with only a shop light and the hum of the city beyond the junkyard fence. His hands bled, his back ached, but every bolt tightened was one step closer to the goal. He didn't tell anyone at school. No announcements, no social media posts. The less they knew, the better. This wasn't for them, but someone was watching. Mr. McCall had started dropping by the garage unannounced, sometimes bringing old tools from his shed, sometimes just leaning on the doorframe with arms crossed, watching in silence. One evening, after Wyatt managed to calibrate the fuel flow sensor, McCall finally spoke. "You're building more than an engine here, son." Wyatt didn't respond. He didn't have to. They both knew it. Wyatt wasn't just putting together wires and steel. He was stitching together something deeper, a future, a name, a reason to keep going. At school, the walls didn't come down, but they stopped closing in. A few students who used to ignore Wyatt now nodded at him in the hall. Not friends, not yet, but not enemies either. The shift was slow, subtle, but real. Even the teachers began to notice his grades climbing. He wasn't just some backwoods kid anymore. He was smart, focused, and relentless. And that scared Chase more than anything. He thrived on control, and Wyatt was proof that you didn't need permission to rise. You just had to keep standing. Tension between them simmered just below the surface. Chase never confronted Wyatt outright. He didn't need to. He had allies, influence, 100 quiet ways to make things harder. But Wyatt refused to react. Every insult rolled off like rain on steel. The more Chase pushed, the calmer Wyatt became. And that calm was unsettling. It made Chase look petty, made him look afraid. The CAMARO, now half-converted and fully operational, wasn't just running, it was roaring. Wyatt took it for test runs late at night, the engine humming with a low, controlled growl. Every mile he drove felt like a step away from everything Chase had tried to bury him under. He knew it still wasn't enough, though. If he really wanted to prove this project meant something, he'd need to show it. Not in a garage, not in a parking lot, but somewhere they couldn't ignore. And so, without telling anyone, he submitted an application to the upcoming Regional Automotive Science Fair. Not as a student from a robotics team, not as a representative of a school, just as Wyatt Turner, a boy from Elk City, son of a soldier, builder of something no one thought possible. The submission form asked for a project title. He thought for a moment, then wrote it in steady block letters, Red Dirt Hybrid. He hit send, exhaled, and for the first time in months allowed himself a brief, honest smile. The morning Wyatt received the acceptance email from the Regional Automotive Science Fair, he didn't smile. He just nodded once, closed the laptop, and got back to work. There were only 10 days left until the event, and every second mattered. The hybrid engine was running, but not consistently. The fuel modulation still lagged under load, and the wiring harness needed reinforcement. He pushed harder, sleeping less, skipping lunch, and using every spare dollar to buy salvage components from a parts yard 2 towns over. Mary noticed the dark circles under his eyes but didn't stop him. She prayed quietly at night, trusting that whatever he was chasing, it came from a place that mattered. Wyatt wasn't trying to impress judges. He was trying to keep a promise written in his father's hand. It all came apart on a Thursday afternoon. Wyatt walked into the garage and immediately sensed something was wrong. The lights were off, the chain lock on the side door was snapped, and the air smelled faintly of burnt rubber. His stomach dropped. The moment he stepped inside, his boots crunched over shattered glass and stripped wire. His engine, was wrecked. The hybrid converter had been smashed with a crowbar. Wires had been yanked from the frame, and The test rig was lying sideways in a puddle of oil. His tool chest had been overturned, drawers emptied, pieces stolen or bent. He stood there for several minutes, completely still, staring at the ruin of months of work. Then he sat down on the floor, leaned back against the CAMARO, and let the silence take over. He didn't cry. He didn't shout. He just shut down. The fair was in 6 days. There was no time, no money, and no way to fix what had been done. And, worst of all, he knew exactly who was behind it. Chase had warned him weeks ago to stay in his lane, and had smirked when Wyatt didn't answer. No proof, no witnesses, but the message was clear. The moment Wyatt threatened to stand out, someone had made sure to drag him back down. That night, Mary found him asleep in the garage, curled up in the front seat of the CAMARO, his father's letter clutched to his chest. She didn't wake him. She just draped his jacket over him and left a thermos of coffee by the door for the morning. The next day, Wyatt skipped school. He didn't touch the engine, didn't sweep up the mess. He just sat, staring at the wreckage. He read the letter again, slower this time. "Son, a man is tested not when things go right, but when everything goes wrong." That sentence hit him like a hammer. He could almost hear his father's voice, steady and unshaken, telling him that storms were meant to be walked through, not feared. Around noon, Mr. McCall showed up, saw the mess, and said nothing. He left, returned an hour later with a soldering kit, a bag of wires, and a name. Roy Keller, a retired mechanic who ran a parts shed on the edge of town, a friend of McCall's. The old man showed up the next morning with a box of parts and one rule: you don't quit unless you're dead. They got to work. Wyatt had to strip everything back to the core. The converter was beyond saving, so they rebuilt it from scratch. McCall rewired the circuit board by hand. Keller taught Wyatt tricks that weren't in manuals: how to splice 2 different makes of sensors, how to repurpose a lawnmower's fuel regulator, how to weld without overheating the housing. They worked 18-hour shifts with no heat, no insulation, and barely enough food. But the engine started coming back to life, louder and stronger than before. It was ugly, mismatched components, duct tape seams, scratches everywhere, but it ran, and that was all Wyatt needed. On the morning of the fair, Wyatt didn't dress in anything fancy, just jeans, boots, and a clean work shirt. He rolled the engine onto a makeshift dolly he'd built himself. No banners, no posters, no polished presentations. Just raw invention and a motor that could speak for itself. The other competitors had sleek displays, 3D printed parts, branded shirts, and parents taking photos. Wyatt stood in a corner of the exhibit hall, ignored by most, until the judges made their rounds. One of them, a senior engineer from American Motors Co., looked at Wyatt's project, raised an eyebrow and asked, "You built this yourself?" Wyatt nodded. "Every bolt." The man asked him to start it. The engine roared to life in one go, quiet, steady, efficient. The sensors held, the converter regulated power like clockwork. The judge leaned in, inspecting the welds, the recycled parts, the logic board. "No school backing?" Wyatt shook his head. "No team?" Another shake. The judge stepped back, looked at the dolly one last time, and just said, "Impressive." He left without another word. Wyatt stayed until the end, watching the awards get handed out. First place went to a team with a solar concept design, second to a self-driving module, third went unannounced until the final moment. An honorable mention with an invitation to a summer internship at American Motors. Wyatt Turner, Red Dirt Hybrid. His name was called over the speakers. Some people clapped. Wyatt didn't even move at first. He stood frozen for a second, then stepped forward, accepted the offer letter in silence, and gave a nod of thanks. No speeches, no celebrations. On the way home, he didn't turn on the radio. He just drove the CAMARO slowly, window down, feeling the wind on his face and the weight of 1,000 broken moments slowly lifting off his shoulders. When he got home, he placed the offer letter next to the framed photo of his father on the mantel. Mary didn't say a word. She just hugged him longer than usual. That night, Wyatt sat in the garage again, the CAMARO resting quietly behind him. The project was over, but something new had started, something no one could vandalize, sabotage, or take away. He hadn't just fixed a car, he'd rebuilt himself. And this time, the engine wouldn't stall. The fair was over, but the ripple it left behind was only beginning. Wyatt didn't return to school looking for praise, and he certainly didn't expect any. He walked the halls just like before, quiet, focused, unnoticed by most. But things had changed. People had seen what he could do, and more importantly, they'd seen how he did it. No help, no team, no sponsors, just grit. And that kind of thing stuck in the back of people's minds, especially in a school obsessed with appearances. Some students, the ones who usually kept to themselves, began to approach him between classes. Nothing big, just a nod, a "Hey, man," or a quick question about engines. Wyatt answered when he could, kept it short, but the wall was starting to crack. Mr. McCall didn't waste time. He marched into the principal's office the Monday after the fair and pitched the idea that had been brewing since he saw Wyatt work, a student-run mechanics club. Hands-on, practical, low budget, no robotics, no competitions, just a space for kids who didn't fit into the polished categories the school liked to push. To everyone's surprise, the principal agreed. Maybe it was the attention Wyatt's. A project had drawn, or maybe he was just tired of hearing Chase's name come up in every meeting. Either way, the club was greenlit. McCall handed Wyatt the key to an old maintenance shed behind the gym and said, "You're running this." Wyatt didn't advertise. He didn't put up flyers or post online. Instead, he walked up to a few kids he'd seen eating alone, failing classes, or getting detention for being disruptive. He asked one question. "You want to build something?" The first week, only 3 showed up. By the second week, there were 10. Word spread fast. These weren't the honor roll types. These were kids who'd been written off, sons of mechanics, daughters of laborers, teens from broken homes or no homes at all. Wyatt taught them everything he knew: how to disassemble a carburetor, how to weld safely, how to read a wiring diagram. But more than that, he taught them discipline. He showed up early, stayed late, and expected the same from them. If you messed around, you were out. Simple as that. It didn't take long for the school to notice. The shed became a kind of sanctuary. Broken lawnmowers were repaired, busted bicycles restored. Eventually, they got their hands on a beat-up pickup from the county impound. Wyatt led the team in bringing it back to life. It wasn't just about machines anymore. It was about pride. These kids had never been trusted with anything, and now they were responsible for real work. They started staying after school without being told, showing up on Saturdays, asking questions, pushing each other to get better. For the first time, they felt useful. Chase watched from a distance. His influence had started to slip. Fewer people followed his lead, and his own club meetings began to empty out. He hated what Wyatt had built, not because it was bad, but because it worked. One afternoon, he showed up at the shed, hands in his jacket, looking more like a lost dog than a rival. The other kids fell silent. Wyatt didn't flinch. "You here to help or waste time?" he asked. Chase hesitated, then muttered, "I don't know yet." Wyatt tossed him a pair of gloves and said, "Figure it out." From that day on, Chase kept showing up. He didn't talk much, and he took orders without complaint. Slowly, he became just another pair of hands. What surprised everyone was how Chase changed. He stopped smirking, stopped talking down to others. He learned to listen. One day, while sanding down the hood of the pickup, he looked at Wyatt and said, "I was wrong about you." Wyatt didn't respond right away. He just said, "Most people are." That was the end of it. No speeches, no dramatics, just work. And in that shed, Surrounded by oil stains and rusted parts, boys became men, and old enemies became teammates. The school started paying attention. Teachers began using the club as a model in staff meetings. Even the principal came by and watched. A group of misfits tune a rebuilt engine like professionals. Word spread beyond the school. Local businesses started donating tools. Parents who had never stepped on school grounds before now showed up to thank Wyatt for giving their kids purpose. Eventually, someone suggested a new initiative, restoring. Donated vehicles to give to struggling families in the community. Wyatt didn't hesitate. He divided the club into teams and assigned leaders. They stripped, cleaned, painted, and rebuilt with focus. When the first restored minivan was handed over to a single mom with 2 jobs and no car, there wasn't a dry eye in the lot. Wyatt never sought the spotlight, but the spotlight found him. Articles were written. A local news crew ran a short feature. He answered questions with as few words as possible and always redirected praise to the team. "They're the ones doing the real work," he said, but people saw through it. They saw the discipline he taught, the culture he created, the fire he lit. He wasn't just building engines, he was building men. Respect, loyalty, integrity. These weren't just words in his father's letter anymore. They were the foundation of something real. At night, Wyatt still worked on the CAMARO. The engine purred now, clean and smooth, but he didn't drive it often. He said it wasn't ready, though everyone knew it wasn't the car that needed more work. It was the meaning behind it. That car had become a symbol, not of speed or muscle, but of memory, of honor, of what a man could be when everything around him tried to say otherwise. Wyatt never forgot what Denver had tried to do to him, how it mocked his roots, ignored his pain, and tried to crush his pride. But instead of running, he planted something new, something stronger, and it was growing. Memorial Day came with clear skies and a silence that felt sacred. For the first time since he'd arrived in Denver, Wyatt wasn't just seen, he was invited. The school was organizing a tribute for veterans, and to everyone's surprise, the principal personally asked Wyatt to lead the procession. Not in uniform, not with fanfare, but in the one thing that carried the soul of a man who'd given everything. His father's fully restored CAMARO. The car had gone from a dusty relic to a living monument, thanks to Wyatt's hands and the help of the very kids who had once been ignored by everyone else. They had painted it with care, polished the trim, and mounted Sergeant Michael Turner's medals into the dash behind protective glass. No one asked why. They all understood what it meant. Wyatt drove the CAMARO slowly through the main avenue, an American flag fixed to the front bumper fluttering in rhythm with the engine's soft growl. People lined the streets, standing, hats off, hands over, hearts. Mary stood on the sidewalk holding a small flag in one hand and the letter from Michael in the other. She didn't cry, not yet. She just stood tall, proud, and still. Behind the CAMARO, Mr. McCall marched in full-dress uniform, chin high, his limp forgotten for the moment. Wyatt didn't wave or speak. He kept his eyes ahead, hands steady on the wheel, carrying more than metal and oil down that street. He carried memory. The moment didn't need noise. It spoke for itself. By the time the parade ended, something had shifted. Wyatt wasn't the hillbilly anymore. He wasn't even just the mechanic. He was a symbol, a name spoken with respect. After the event, Chase approached the podium set up for the closing ceremony. The crowd went quiet as he stepped forward, note card in hand, but he didn't read from it. He looked at Wyatt, then out at the crowd. "When I first met Wyatt Turner, I didn't see him. I saw what I wanted to see, a rival, someone to keep down, but he showed me what strength really looks like. Not loud, not proud, just honest and steady." Then, without another word, he stepped back. That was all. Enough. Wyatt didn't say anything after the speech. He wasn't one for speeches. But when Chase handed him a framed photo of the CAMARO with the flag at full sail, Wyatt took it without hesitation. "My dad would have liked this," he said, "but he already knew what I was made of. I just had to catch up." They shook hands, and nothing more needed to be said. Sometimes redemption doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a quiet moment, the kind that echoes longer than applause ever could. The weeks that followed moved fast. Wyatt started his summer internship with American Motors, where his hands were suddenly working on high-tech systems under engineers who now saw him as more than a promising kid. They saw a man. He worked full days, then drove back to the school every Saturday to help at the shop. The club had doubled in size, new faces, new stories, and all of them listened when Wyatt spoke, because he didn't speak often. But when he did, people paid attention. He didn't lecture, he showed, by the way he worked, by the way he treated people. And in those moments, he became more than a mentor. He became the standard. He didn't chase attention, but his story traveled. A local paper ran a feature. A veterans organization reached out to honor his father posthumously and invited Wyatt to speak. He declined the speech, but he showed up, stood by his mother, and accepted the honor on his father's behalf. In a world full of people trying to be heard, Wyatt had learned the value of silence. When you live with purpose, people notice, even if you never ask them to. Back at school, the shop had turned into something bigger. They had a new project, restoring vehicles for veterans in need. Wyatt coordinated donations, assigned roles, and oversaw builds. The first truck went to a retired Marine who'd been taking the bus for 3 years. When the man sat behind the wheel and gripped the steering like it was gold, nobody said a word. One of the younger kids in the club started crying. Wyatt just put a hand on the boy's shoulder and said, "This is what it's about." By now, the CAMARO had become more than Wyatt's car. It belonged to the school, the club, the community. Everyone had left a mark on it, whether it was polishing the chrome, tuning the engine, or just sitting in the passenger seat and listening. To Wyatt explain what made it run. It had changed, and so had he. He still wore the same ball cap, still kept to himself. But there was a steadiness in him now, a weight behind his eyes that came from earning every inch of ground he stood on. He didn't just remember his father. He lived like him, quietly, faithfully, with every bolt turned and every life touched. And yet Wyatt didn't see any of this as a finish line. To him, it was just the next step. He hadn't arrived, he'd only begun. He didn't want fame or thanks. He just wanted to make things better, one engine, one kid, one day at a time. And that's exactly what he kept doing. 2 years passed like a gust of wind through the prairie. Wyatt Turner was no longer a boy, fixing a broken-down CAMARO in the shadows of a Denver junkyard. At 18, he worked as a junior technician at American Motors during the day and studied mechanical engineering at night. His name carried weight now, not because people handed him anything, but because he earned every inch of ground under his boots. He didn't talk much about the past anymore, didn't have to. It was stitched into every calloused hand he shook, every project he completed, every student he still mentored at the school on weekends. The garage had turned into a full-blown vocational program with funding, tools, and waiting lists. Wyatt never missed a Saturday. He still wore the same boots, drove the same car, and kept his father's letter folded neatly in the glove box. On a warm spring morning, the school invited Wyatt back to speak to the next generation of club members. It wasn't something he'd asked for, and truthfully, he didn't want the attention. But when McCall called and said they need to hear from someone who's been in the fire, Wyatt didn't hesitate. He showed up early, walked through the shop like he never left, nodded to the kids who now looked at him like he was carved from stone. Some of them only knew the legend, that he'd rebuilt a car from nothing, that he'd been sabotaged and kept going, that he'd led a group of underdogs into something that mattered. They didn't know the long nights, the quiet breakdowns, or the feeling of being completely alone, and that's what Wyatt chose to talk about. He stepped onto the makeshift stage, wearing a plain shirt, jeans, and a quiet face. He didn't bring notes. He didn't need them. "You don't have to be the smartest or the fastest," he began, his voice steady. "You just need to show up every day, even when no one's looking, even when it feels like it ain't worth it. Faith, courage, discipline, those are tools too. Use them. Build with them." The room was dead silent. Some kids nodded, some stared like he was speaking a language they'd been waiting their whole lives to hear. When he stepped down, no one clapped right away. It wasn't that kind of speech. It was something heavier, more honest. Then someone stood up and started applauding, and the rest followed. Not wild or loud, just steady, like a heartbeat. Outside, Chase waited for him by the CAMARO. They hadn't spoken much since that Memorial Day, but there was no tension between them now, just time and growth. Chase handed him a small, framed photo. It was the CAMARO again, same flag, same street, but this time shot from behind, the car moving forward into the distance. "Thought you'd want this," he said. Wyatt took it, nodded once. "My old man would have liked this one too, but I think he already knew." Chase smiled, shook his hand, and left it at that. No long goodbyes, just respect. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, Wyatt climbed into the CAMARO and started the engine. It came to life with the same smooth rumble it always had, only now it felt like something more than machinery. He pulled out of the school lot, turned onto the open road, and rolled the windows down. The wind hit his face like it used to back in Elk City, and for a moment, he wasn't in Denver anymore. He wasn't in the city that tried to break him. He was just a boy, with a steering wheel, a path ahead, and no weight left on his shoulders. The letter was still in the glove box. The one that reminded him, again and again, who he was and what he was made of. He didn't drive fast. He didn't need to. Every mile was a mile he'd earned. Every turn was a chapter closed. And as the last light of day stretched across the highway, Wyatt Turner kept driving, calm, steady, and free. He had nothing left to prove, not to the world, not to his classmates, not even to himself, because a real man doesn't chase applause. He just lives by the code written in his bones. And Wyatt's code was simple. Honor what came before, build something worth leaving behind, and never forget where you came from, even when the road takes you far from home. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Your support helps us grow and bring you even more amazing content. See you in the next one.